Hey, Sammy. Just letting you know we've opened it up to people to start joining. So,
Should my camera be off for the whole time?
yeah, if you just want to keep your camera off and yourself on mute, and then when the Q&A comes, just send me the good ones. Hi, everyone who's joining us. Just want to let you know we're going to be getting started in about 4 minutes. So just sit tight. And thank you for joining our webinar. Hi, for those of you who are just joining us, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. All right, guys, I'm gonna leave like one more minute for people to trickle in and then we'll get started. All right, guys, thank you so much for attending our webinar, Chaco Canyon, A Journey Through Land and Time. My name is Virginia Carter, and I'll be your moderator tonight. To start us off, we have some great presentations from some wonderful speakers, and that's gonna last about 25 minutes, and then we're gonna go right into a Q&A panel, so enjoy. Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Chaco Canyon, A Journey Through Land and Time. Over the next hour, we're going to learn about one of the most culturally and historically significant places in the United States, and we're going to hear from some of the top experts in the area. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm your moderator tonight. My name is Virginia Carter. I'm a public lands associate on the conservation team at Environment America. Environment America is a national environmental group with state-based groups, including Environment New Mexico. We work on campaigns for clean air, clean water, and to protect the places we love. As a regional organizer, I work on our efforts to protect Chaco Canyon and other special places in the Southwest. Environment America has a track record of working to protect Chaco Canyon and other public lands in New Mexico from fracking, including organizing health professionals against fracking, advocating for funding, and calling on the current Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, to protect the area. Some places are just too special to drill, and Chaco is one of those places. The area is culturally, historically, and biologically significant, and we must protect the greater Chaco area from future oil leases. It is imperative that we do so to protect the health of the community, as well as to preserve the natural biodiversity of the region. Chaco Canyon is an amazing place for hiking, stargazing, and exploring ancient pueblos that are more than 1,000 years old. In fact, the pueblos in Chaco Canyon are so important, they have been designated a World Heritage Site. Unfortunately, oil and gas companies want to frack right outside the national park, which would threaten its sensitive environment with toxic pollution. Allowing the oil and gas industry to set up shop on the doorstep of Chaco Canyon would mean turning this priceless place into an industrial zone. Outside of the park, over 90% of the surrounding basin is leased to oil companies. In the short term, we must protect a 10-mile buffer zone around the park from any future leases. In the long term, Congress needs to pass a comprehensive bill protecting the greater Chaco region, including ending the leasing program in the area, cleaning up existing wells, and emphasizing adequate tribal consultation and community health. Through grassroots efforts, we plan to show Congress that this is a place people care about, not just in New Mexico, but all over the country. We know that the majority of voters do not think we should drill in special places. Our aim is to show the country that Chaco Canyon is one of those special places. Ultimately, we must end oil and gas leasing on public lands. Fossil fuel development threatens the health and beauty of some of our nation's most iconic places. And once ruined, unique landscapes can never be restored. And once habitats are destroyed, species cannot survive. We will continue to call on the Biden administration to end the leasing program. We will also support policies to force the responsible cleanup of abandoned wells, including 700 in New Mexico alone. That being said, it is my great honor to introduce to you our first speaker, New Mexico Congresswoman Teresa Fernandez. The Congresswoman represents New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District. In Washington, she holds a leadership role with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus as freshman representative. Congresswoman Fernandez serves as chair of the Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States. She has also been appointed to the House Committee on Education and Labor, the House Committee on Natural Resources, and the Committee on House Administration. She is a 17th generation Northern New Mexican. Before coming to Congress, Fernandez worked as an attorney and advocate and won important legal battles to advance voting rights, promote tribal sovereignty, and protect our environment and waters. She has helped secure nearly $1 billion and then helped build schools, rural health clinics, broadband, businesses, affordable housing, and other critical infrastructure for New Mexico. Fernandez was also a Clinton and Obama presidential appointee and worked as a White House Fellow on housing issues and as Vice Chair of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. So without further ado, Congresswoman Fernandez.
Hello, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Teresa Fernandez, serving the beautiful and beautifully diverse 3rd Congressional District of Nuevo Mexico. Thank you for the invitation to speak about how important it is to protect Chaco Canyon, including its nearby communities, as well as its natural and cultural resources. There are sacred and historic resources located throughout the greater Chaco region. As you all know, it's home to hundreds of internationally and nationally significant cultural resources that include historic roads, communities, and shrines. When I was elected, I promised to meet with and listen to my constituents on a regular basis to hear their issues and needs. Chaco is an example of community engagement that I'm proud to be part of. So let me tell you how we arrived where we're at today. My predecessors in the New Mexico Congressional Delegation worked hard with the tribes and introduced earlier versions of legislation that passed the House of Representatives last Congress on a bipartisan basis. But as the newly elected Congresswoman, it was important for me to engage in tribal consultation of my own and hear directly from the stakeholders when I took office. We met with the Navajo Nation Council delegates and Navajo Alatees, as well as the All Pueblo Council of Governors and advocacy organizations. One of the most beautiful things about my district is the diversity within our communities, diversity in cultures and lived experiences, and in ways of thinking. The passion everyone brings to our meetings inspires me. And while these meetings did not resolve all of our differences in opinion, it did lead to a stronger bill. For example, based on these conversations, we've included language to better recognize the Navajo Nation's cultural connections to Chaco. I'm also proud to have secured language in the House Interior Environmental Appropriation Bill. It will prevent funds from being used to lease or nominate land for mineral development within the 10-mile buffer area around Chaco Canyon until ongoing tribal cultural resource studies are completed. The same language provides an additional $600,000 to such studies, which are key for tribes to better document their history and connections to the area. With Secretary Holland leading the Department of Interior, I've never been more motivated to uplift tribal sovereignty and protect our cultural resources. A molecule of gas is the same wherever it's found, but these historic cultural resources cannot be replaced. Once they're gone forever. Ahora es cuando. Now is the time to protect our land, water, air, and most importantly, our people and the resources that are important to our people. That's why I'm committed to efforts to protect Chaco, and that's why I'll forever do my best to be a leader for the people and with the people. Muchísimas gracias.
I would like to give a big thank you to Congresswoman Teresa Fernandez for speaking to us and for all the work she has done and continues to do to protect and preserve our special places. Next up, I would like to introduce Paul Reed. Paul Reed has been a preservation archaeologist with Archaeology Southwest since 2001. He is based in Taos, New Mexico, and still works occasionally as Chaco scholar and at Salmon Ruins Museum. Reed has published many books and articles on the region that have explored the origins of Puebloan culture and Chaco Canyon. His most recent writing is an edited book entitled Aztec, Salmon, and the Pueblo Heartland of the Middle San Juan, published in the School for Advanced Research's Press popular series in 2018. Over the decade, Reed has been working to protect the greater Chaco landscape from the effects of expanded oil and gas development associated with fracking in the Mancos Shale Formation. Through a series of meetings and forums with public officials, tribal leaders, various U.S. government agencies, and New Mexico's congressional delegation, Archaeology Southwest and its partners have focused on expanding protections to sites, traditional cultural places, and fragile landscapes in the greater San Juan Basin. The most recent effort on this front is to partner with the Pueblo of Acoma to complete a focused ethnographic study of the Acoma's connection to the greater Chaco landscape. Now to hear from the man himself, Paul Reed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Reed. I work for the Tucson, Arizona-based nonprofit group Archaeology Southwest. We focus on preservation, research, public outreach, support of tribal concerns, and advocacy on a variety of cultural and archaeological matters. My job title is Preservation Archaeologist and Chaco Scholar, and I've lived and worked for Archaeology Southwest in New Mexico for more than 20 years. Now, as part of Environment America's webinar on Chaco Canyon and the greater Chaco landscape, I want to discuss the cultural and archaeological significance of these amazing places. Several centuries ago, between about 800 and 1250 CE, Chaco Canyon was the center of a thriving Puebloan society that flourished in the Four Corners region of New Mexico and adjoining modern states. The Chacoans built hundreds of great house structures and great kivas across the region, and they connected many of these places with miles of roads and other landscape features. Although non-indigenous people tend to view Chaco Canyon as a place of the past, nothing could be further from the truth for Pueblo descendant communities. For Pueblo people of today, Chaco is a living, breathing place that connects them directly to their heritage and to their ancestors. Chaco thus has deep spiritual and cultural importance to the Pueblo people, as well as other Native American tribes in the region. Now, sites associated with Chaco society and other time periods are well protected within the boundaries of Chaco Culture National Historical Park. The park and a select group of affiliated sites that lie outside the boundary are together designated a World Heritage Site, one of only about 26 in the United States, and the only site that's managed, at least in part, by the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM. The extensive landscape that surrounds Chaco Canyon, the Greater Chaco landscape as we call it, is managed by a variety of federal, state, private, and tribal owners. This checkerboard of ownership seriously complicates management and preservation of special places on the Greater Chaco landscape. Now, as a result of decades of oil and gas development, many of the features associated with the Greater Chaco landscape, the communications and road systems that once linked the canyon to great house sites located as far away as southeast Utah, and which we're still identifying to this very day, many of these sites have been damaged. Furthermore, the setting of many of the most important sites that surround Chaco Canyon, which we know are of special importance to Pueblo tribes and other tribal members, has been dramatically altered by the construction of nearby oil and gas wells, tanks, and other infrastructure. In addition, I think it's fair to say there's been a lack of recognition by some of the agencies and land managers that the landscape surrounding Chaco Canyon is a distinct resource that needs to be managed in a very special way. Now, to help address these concerns, Archaeology Southwest and its tribal preservation environmental partners, of which there are many, we've all worked for nearly a decade to enhance protections for Greater Chaco. One of the most recent projects in this effort relates to the 10-mile cultural protection zones that have been proposed for Chaco in 2019 and with current legislation that's pending in our Congress. This action would remove BLM surface lands from leasing in 3 distinct 10-mile zones around Chaco and 2 of its outlying great house communities, thereby affording these sensitive areas much greater protection. Now, to better understand the nature and extent of cultural resources within this 10-mile protection zone, Archaeology Southwest undertook a reconnaissance project last year that focused primarily on areas to the northwest, north, and northeast of Chaco. The approximately 700,000 acre area encompassed by the zone contains roughly 4,200 known archaeological and historic sites. These 4,200 sites speak to episodic use of the area by diverse cultural groups that we identify as Paleo-Indic, Puebloan, Navajo, and many others, from about 10,000 BCE to the present. Because less than about 20% of this area in these zones has actually been surveyed, the site count is undoubtedly much higher. We would roughly estimate perhaps 20,000 sites. In addition, very little recent ethnographic work has been completed with any tribal groups, aside from a small project that Archaeology Southwest conducted with the Pueblo of Acoma in 2018. During this work, we found dozens of traditional cultural properties, or TCPs, that suggest that there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of other similar sites as yet unidentified across Greater Chaco. Now, the good news is there's a cultural project that tribes are undertaking right now that will identify many more of these sites. Now, the main goal of this project was to identify or confirm cultural communities in this 10-mile zone, and we were looking basically for sites that were of a similar time period and were spatially located next to each other. And what we wanted to do with this work was essentially provide information to the BLM and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, because at this point, they're in the process of modifying their long-range management plan. And as I said, we've been involved in this with our partners for nearly a decade. We want to end up with a plan that really protects some of the most fragmented and delicate parts of this landscape. So we're trying to look at this landscape not just as sites in isolation, but with larger pieces of it. So what we found during our study was basically at least 6 site clusters or communities that to this point have had very little protection within the 10-mile zone around Chaco. Now, part of our focus here was to help folks understand that this 10-mile zone is not an arbitrary distinction. We didn't throw darts at a dartboard and say, hey, what kind of zone can we end up with? In this 10-mile zone, we have those 4,200 sites I mentioned, these 6 site clusters or communities. I would guess at least 3 or 4 dozen additional smaller communities in this area. We have significant archaeological and historic and cultural resources in this zone that need our protection. So ultimately, what we're going to do is prepare a proposal to the agencies that would set aside additional zones of protection in Chaco. And this, of course, depends on pending legislation, potentially other administrative activities. But in the end, we would like to protect many, many more pieces of this precious landscape before it's all lost to oil and gas development. So that's kind of a quick overview of what's going on from an archaeological and historic preservation standpoint across Greater Chaco. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Reed. Now I would like to introduce our last speaker before our Q&A panel, Emily Wolfe. Emily Wolfe is the New Mexico Program Coordinator for the National Parks Conservation Association. She coordinates program and administrative functions for the Four Corners region. National Parks Conservation Association's aim is to advocate for the protection and conservation of national parks, increase public lands access, and education of communities around our natural resources, culture, and environment. And Emily believes that environmental and social justice are core values to this work.
Hi, I'm Emily Wolfe, the New Mexico Program Coordinator for National Parks Conservation Association. Really excited to bring you some background and information on the dark night skies at Chaco Culture National Historical Park. So Chaco Culture was first established as a national monument in 1907 to preserve and tell the story of Chaco Canyon, which continues to be an important cultural center for tribal communities today. The park protects many of these impressive structures, and it is one of the largest collections of ancestral sites north of Mexico. While the footprint of Chaco Culture National Historical Park itself is small, the larger connected cultural landscape is vast. In and around the park, ecological resources, cultural sites, properties, and resources are greatly significant and essential to the integrity of the landscape, including clean air and water, wildlife habitat, culturally significant sites including vegetation, and dark night skies. Chaco has long been considered by many night sky enthusiasts to be one of the best places in America to stargaze. Today, amidst this ancient landscape, visitors can experience the same sky that Chacoans observed 1,000 years ago. The protection of dark night skies is a priority at Chaco, not only for the enjoyment of stargazing visitors, but for the natural environment as well. Nocturnal wildlife relies on darkness for survival, and the natural rhythms of humans and plants depend on an unaltered night sky. And night sky and astronomy are essential to understanding and fully engaging with the formation and continued significance of Chacoan sites. Archaeoastronomer Anna Sofer, who studied the sites for 20 years beginning in 1977, has documented the intricate astronomical system in the design of this vast Puebloan site extending beyond the park boundaries. Soaring up from the canyon is Fajada Butte. Near the top, Chacoans cut 3 large slabs of sandstone from the cliff and stood them on end. Behind them, they carved a large spiral petroglyph onto the cliff wall and a smaller spiral to the left of it. When Sofer visited the site near noon on the summer solstice, she discovered a ray of light that came through the opening between the slabs and created a dagger of light that perfectly bisected the large spiral. As she studied it throughout the year, she found that a second sun dagger bisects the smaller spiral on the summer and autumn equinoxes. 2 sun daggers perfectly bracket the large spiral on the winter solstice. The Chacoans devised this calendar through many decades of careful observation. And astronomical alignments have been noted in many other sites at Chaco. Lunar alignments have also been discovered. When the moon reaches a point in its 18.5-year lunar cycle known as the minimum extreme, its shadow falls in the center of that spiral where the sun dagger appears on the summer solstice. When it's at maximum extreme, 9¼ years later, its shadow falls on the outer edge of the spiral where the sun dagger appears at winter solstice. The spiral has 9½ turns, so year by year, the moon's midwinter full moon shadow crosses one of the turns of the spiral. 7 buildings in Chaco Canyon have alignments with the maximum and minimum risings and settings of the moon. No other culture in the world is known to build structures in alignment with this long cycle. Chaco Canyon appears to demonstrate an astronomical mirror of the cosmos where Pueblo people gathered for ceremonial worship. In 2013, Chaco Culture National Historical Park was officially designated a dark sky park by the International Dark Sky Association. The park's natural nighttime darkness, commitment to reducing light pollution, and ongoing public outreach led to its certification. Chaco takes advantage of this asset through evening astronomy programs at their public observatory, where we can all observe the clear and brilliant dark night sky. Thank you. Please let me know if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Emily. That wraps up our speaker presentations for the evening. Once again, I would like to thank all of our speakers for participating and sharing their knowledge with us. I would also like to thank the audience for being here. I hope you learned something new about Chaco. Before we head into the Q&A panel, I would like to show a wonderful video from Archaeology Southwest. Enjoy and start thinking about your questions for our panelists.
Chaco Culture National Historical Park and the surrounding landscape is sacred land. For the Pueblo tribes, Chaco is the home of their ancestors. The greater Chaco landscape includes Pueblo Bonito, Pueblo Alto, the Pierre site, Twin Angels, and oil and gas facilities just up the road. Nearby drilling is threatening the greater Chaco region, putting the health and safety of nearby communities at risk right now. The Trump administration has made several attempts to lease the land on the doorstep of this UNESCO World Heritage Site to oil companies. Already, nearby drilling has brought air, visual, and noise pollution. Local tribes have fought for decades to protect these sacred places and the health of their families. Permanently protecting the greater Chaco landscape from drilling would ensure the region's culture, people, air, and water are kept safe for generations to come. These measures are supported by New Mexico's Governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, the New Mexico Congressional Delegation, the All Pueblo Council of Governors, the tribes, and other leaders across the state. It's time to act permanently to protect the greater Chaco landscape and the health of New Mexico's tribes from oil and gas drilling before it's too late.
All right, well, that was a wonderful presentation from all of our panelists. So I'd like to just thank them again and thank you all for attending. We're about to start our Q&A portion of the event. So if our panelists wanna flip their cameras back on, we can have a discussion. Joining us on the panel is Emily Wolfe, Paul Reed, and Derek Toledo will be here representing the Congresswoman. So just start, you can submit your questions to the Q&A forum. It's at the bottom of the Zoom link. So I guess our first question, kind of a mix of a bunch of questions that Paul Reed, you might be the best to answer this, but there's a lot of people that seem to want to visit Chaco Canyon. So they want to know if it's how it is to get there, if it's better to camp or and how to obviously leave no trace is the best policy, but how else can they respect the communities that live there and respect the cultural and historical significance of the area while still experiencing its beauty and its wonder, and if there are any books in particular that they should be getting before they go.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty good slate of questions. No, I welcome the opportunity and thank you for those questions. I think folks should do some prep work before they go to Chaco if they haven't been there before. The National Park Service has a wonderful website on Chaco. If you just search out NPS Chaco Historical Park, that'll pop up. A number of folks have written great books on Chaco, so it's kind of the same thing. Chaco Canyon, search for authors like Steve Lexon, Ruth Van Dyke, Win Vivian, etc. I think folks should go to any ancestral indigenous site in America or anywhere in the world with a very respectful attitude. I think folks should do their best when they go to these places to try to shed as much of their own cultural baggage. And I know that's kind of a tall order, but I personally feel like the key to understanding Chaco and these other amazing sacred ancient places is to try to imagine what life was actually like there when people lived there, and not necessarily bring all our 21st century baggage into it. So that's kind of the start of what for me is the way I launch tours when I do that. But I think folks should visit and enjoy. The road is actually in really good shape right now too. I can say that. I was there with a group about a week ago. So the road is being well maintained despite flooding earlier in the year. So yeah, go to Chaco, have fun. I hope that helps.
No, I think that was very well put. So there's another question that honestly probably goes back to you again, Paul. That is the thinking on Chaco, and do we still believe that the location was for religious ceremonies, or is there more of a leaning towards that people lived here and that it was a place for community, or do you think it was just a place for religious ceremonies?
Well, I will confess that I am an outlier. That's a joke. I study Chaco outliers. I am an outlier. Chaco was a very complicated residential and ritual center. And I think that most of my Pueblo friends and colleagues would probably find that to be at least the beginning of an okay, explanation from a non-Indigenous person like myself. I think that we minimize Chaco by trying to just describe it as a ceremonial place. And that probably sounds funny to people, but I think Chaco's richness lies in all of the things that happen there. And for those of us who understand or begin to have an understanding of Pueblo culture, present and past, Pueblo people are very focused on corn farming. Corn is the most important thing, among others, but one of the most important in the Pueblo world. So I don't personally believe Chaco Canyon would have grown to be the amazing place that it was unless abundant corn farming was possible and took place there. So that's I hope a short and concise answer. There's a lot of really interesting research on this, but I think the richness of Chaco lies in the integration of things that in the modern world we would see as maybe the sacred and the profane. We tend, I think, to separate these things a lot more, those of us who are non-Indigenous people. And I think Indigenous folks, from what little I know and have tried to learn from Indigenous people, they have a very integrated worldview. And I think that Chaco is best viewed as an integrated, holistic place that had all of the things that we find in any ancient residential place and ritual place, but with a uniquely Pueblo and Chacoan flair to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So dichotomy of both. All right, so the next one, I think Derek, you might be best equipped to answer this, and I can also jump in. People are wondering what's in the works to protect Chaco. Are there any congressional bills or administrative actions in the works to protect the area from oil drilling? And if so, what are their status and how can people help facilitate those and get those passed?
Thanks for that question. I just wanted to throw in like my 2 cents for the last question, since I'm one of the Pueblo people. I would say consider Chaco as at the time, DC. So there's this center of all natives and all things happening. So if you've been to Chaco, you see there's housing and there's like different ceremonial areas. So consider Chaco like a DC. Everyone comes together for ceremonies or even for meetings, and it's at the crossroads of like so many Pueblos and Navajo Nation and Apache. So I would say that's like a good understanding of what Chaco was. It was a huge center of people coming through. If there's even roads that Paul could elaborate on, there's like ancient roads of like trails that people used to follow. So that's also proof of that. Right now, Congresswoman Teresa Fernandez has introduced the Chaco's Protection Act, and it's going through voting right now. If you're familiar with things that are happening on the Hill, there's a lot of voting happening and discussions about the budget and things of that sort. So in the bill, there's a lot written to protect the communities within the 10-mile buffer, especially for like Navajo Nation and Pueblos. The Navajo Nation and Latis will keep all of their land rights. They can use their land as they see fit. So the bill is to protect the area, the Chaco cultural heritage area, and the integrity of the land, and make sure that the people in the area are protected from these outside extractive industries. So one thing that's always helpful not saying to do it, but the one thing that's been helpful is like when people reach out to us and send like letters of support, like the All Public Council of Governors sent a letter to us in support of this Chaco legislation, things like that. If there's an organization you're part of or communities, being able to see letters like that is really helpful to the Congressman. We know who it's for. We know who we're fighting for. It's a reminder of the people that are invested in the area and have cultural roots there.
Wonderful. And then the next question is for Emily. You talked about how the structures really represent the astronomy and the moon and the sun. Do we know if there were also recorded like stories that a lot of cultures have about the placements of these things and of the constellations and the sun and the moon?
Yeah, I would actually maybe turn that to Derek again. I saw another question about Anna Sofair's work, and I would also point people to the Solstice Project. That's kind of some of where her work is published. But Derek, I'd love to throw that to you about stories.
Yeah, there's a great amount of stories from that area. If anybody is interested in going, just be sure to ask all the questions you can think of even before you go, because all the park rangers know the stories. But even if you have friends, like I saw some of the questions saying, if we're coming from out of state and we want to respect the people in the area, the Pueblo people in Navajo Nation, if you have like different organizations, if you can reach out to an organization or entity and ask them just as politely as possible about maybe additional resources that they can find, stories. Even if you have friends in the Pueblos and Navajo Nation, we have a lot of stories too. And like the most famous ones are like the ones with the solstice. That's always really interesting to hear. Then you see like the dagger go through the calendar. Things like that are like, that's one of the more popular ones. So that's not a bad thing to ask about, is learning about how the people used to live and understanding their ways of life. It's always an interesting take.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. So we have one more question that I think can go kind of to maybe anyone, just about oil and gas and how it's affecting the landscape there and why people are still pushing for it in this area. I can also take it. So outside of the basin, about over 90%, or outside of Chaco in the basin, about 90% of the area has been leased to oil and gas drilling. And it has affected the local people by polluting the waters and the air quality, as well as, abandoned wells aren't getting cleaned up responsibly. The burden to that is falling on taxpayers and not on the companies that put in the wells in the first place. So the current status of drilling is that there's far too much, and we really need to have responsible cleanup of abandoned well sites, as well as ending the leasing program that is in the area.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, there's, almost daily, if not definitely daily, spills and accidents and leaks from all of these active sites. And so companies that are not on the hook for cleanup and generally are neglecting their sites, they have a huge impact on water supply, on the watershed, on air quality. I think American Lung Association gave the region a pretty poor grade for asthma and just air quality impacts on people's health. So in this largely industrialized energy landscape, it's had a huge toll on people's health and quality of life.
The other thing I might throw in is there was a question about the city of Farmington. Well, the city of Farmington has been based on oil and gas for something like 70 years, largely. And, I lived there for more than 26 years. And there have been various pushes at different times to transition away from oil and gas. And, but it generally circles back. So I think it's fair to say that that community, that part of the state still thinks oil and gas is a thing. And I think a lot of us are seeing the transition to clean energy coming on faster than others might. So this is part of the challenge, honestly, the political challenge in the entire state of New Mexico, and particularly in the Northwest and the Southeast corners. But I hope we can convince people that clean energy is not the future of 50 years, it's the future of 10-ish, 10 to 15 years. And that we really need to begin taking concrete steps to make this transition. And we are doing that, but taking oil and gas away from our sacred places is the bare minimum as far as I'm concerned to, keep us on the right path.
Absolutely. We actually got another video that I'm going to try and share from Keegan King. So we're going to take a quick break from our Q&A, but keep thinking of your questions and we'll get back to them. So Keegan King couldn't make our panel tonight, but he did just send in a very lovely video. So let me introduce Keegan. He is from the Pueblo of Acoma and has over 17 years of political and public policy work experience. He has managed dozens of candidate and issue campaigns as a consultant. And in 2019, he started his own company, a native-owned political consulting company. Since then, he has worked as political director of the New Mexico Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, national field director of the Pushback Network, Delta director for the United We Dream, and bureau chief of the Indian Affairs Department. Recently, Keegan has focused on the efforts to protect the greater Chaco region and other sacred sites in New Mexico. He is from New Mexico himself, so now I'm going to try and screen share this and hope it works.
Guadze Hopa. Hello everyone. My name is Keegan King and I'm from the Pueblo of Acoma. I also serve as a board member for the conservation organization New Mexico Wild. For the past few years, I've worked on the campaign to protect the greater Chaco landscape. This campaign has focused on working with tribal leaders and indigenous communities to highlight the need for protection of this sacred landscape. For Pueblo people, Chaco is at the very heart of our universe. The land, its cultural properties, the flora and fauna are an integral part of Pueblo philosophy, religion, and our worldview. The greater Chaco region and its outlier sites are part of a greater Pueblo landscape, going deep into Mexico, north into Utah and Colorado, and from Arizona all the way to Kansas. The ties that our indigenous communities have to far-flung regions across the United States and deep into Central America extend back into history. Before colonization, for thousands of years, trade routes, cultural exchange, technological innovation were all parts of life in Chaco, Mesa Verde, and Bears Ears. And they are a part of our shared human history. That human history is recorded. It is recorded in the landscape of these places, of Chaco, Bears Ears, Mesa Verde, Bandelier, the list goes on and on. It is recorded in the landscape, in these sacred places. It is recorded in the languages and traditions that our people carry on to this day. And it was in this crucible of Pueblo civilization in Chaco that our people became experts in high desert agriculture, plant and animal domestication, in healing, in the development of public works and monumental architecture, as well as in astronomical observation. Aside from all of these technological advancement and innovations, this landscape is where our ancestors laid down their prayers for future generations, instilled their intentions and hopes for the future into the land itself. It is for all of these reasons that this landscape remains sacred and must be protected. Unfortunately, for the past few years, we've seen increased encroachment of oil and gas production into the region. In an area that is already overrun with oil and gas wells, well pads, and roads, we are calling on leadership to preserve the remaining pristine areas within the region, and that we safeguard this place once and for all. We believe that a mineral withdrawal outlined in legislation is one possible solution. Legislation like this would hold Alati owners exempt, but would ensure that federal lands within a 10-mile buffer around Chaco could no longer be developed. In an area that is already 90% leased, we believe this is a modest request to protect a World Heritage Site. And so today, Pueblo leaders, indigenous communities, and allies across the world call on Congress, our president, local and regional leadership to do the right thing, to protect Chaco Canyon once and for all, permanently, for future generations. The lessons that the Chaco landscape and all of these sacred sites have for human history, for all of us, for our shared narrative, extend back into the centuries. We must do everything we can to learn from our ancestors and to provide those lessons for the next generation. We can do that by working together to protect Chaco. With that, I thank you and hope that you will join me in advocating for protection of Chaco. Thank you.
Oh, those are some very thoughtful words from Keegan King. Unfortunately, some scheduling conflicts came up and he wasn't able to join us today, but he sends everyone his regards. So we will get back, take a couple more questions before we wrap up this webinar. We have one that's kind of fun. Can you each share with us one of your favorite places in Chaco Canyon and why it's special to you? If Emily, you want to start us off.
Oh man, I was hoping I'd have a little more time to think about it. Well, I was just fortunate enough to go recently, and I was really struck by Casa Rinconada. one of, I think, the largest kivas, and it was incredible. And so that sort of encompasses this area where you can kind of walk amongst these amazing structures, but then also from one point see clear across the canyon to another small site, or a large site, but far away, on top of the opposite wall of the canyon. So that was really, really pretty incredible. And I loved seeing that, and just how that entire space made me feel.
Derek, you want to go next? Oh, right as you start drinking.
Sure. Well, my favorite spot is one I mentioned already, the solstice stone, but since people can't really go there, I would go just like the center. It kind of gives me like, it reminds me of walking into somewhere similar to Egypt. Like you see the walls and the structures. If you're walking through the main Chaco area, the center stage, you'll notice the walls are like 3 feet wide, something like that. But just being able to walk through those hallways and see the walls, and then how clean the structure is, it's pretty amazing. It takes you back really far, and it makes you wonder how smart and great these architects were back in the day. But just being there is
Yeah, that sounds otherworldly. Paul, do you want to give us your favorite?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Emily. There's way too much, but I love the sites that are in the canyon floor at Chaco. But for me, what makes the entire experience come together is taking the somewhat difficult path to go up to the sites at Pueblo Alto and a site called New Alto. So getting up above, you get to a point on top of the canyon, the canyon wall about 200 feet up, and you get a bird's eye view of Pueblo Bonito primarily, but also a glimpse at some of the other sites. And then going all the way up to where Old and New Alto, as we might call them, are set, then the North Road takes off and goes up towards the area we're talking about in the 10-mile zones and further out. So for me, that kind of draws it all together to get that look.
Wonderful. All right, I think we're gonna get another question in, and this one is about the wildlife. I'm wondering what types of wildlife and plants are in the area, as well as what the temperature extremes are like, and how climate change is affecting both the ecosystem there and the climate there. Emily, you might want to take this.
Sure. Well, so there's a few vegetation specifics that I was hoping I could like quickly go and remind myself of, because there's maybe Derek and Paul, you'll remember there's a kind of rare protected plant species that occurs in the greater Chaco area, and I'm forgetting which one it is, but it's, a lot of the extremes are pretty extreme. So it's an area that's quite dry, and in the hotter days of the summer can easily get to the 90s and 100 degrees. And then it's high elevation, so it can dip down and get pretty cold at night. So there's big swings to prepare yourself for if you're going to visit, especially to go camping. It's in a climate that is generally, arid sagebrush and some juniper. It's certainly taking the tolls of climate change, with the region becoming more arid and water retention being lost by the soil. So definite needs underway for that type of, community support, ecological restoration.
Wonderful. Paul or Derek, do you have anything to add to that about the wildlife?
Well, one of the more outstanding features of Chaco, at least right now, is a herd of up to 40 elk. And you rarely get to see them as a group, but I've seen little herds, kind of the herdlets of 10 or 12 at various points, really almost any time of year, but especially getting into the fall, and then in the early to mid spring as well. So that's pretty spectacular to be driving down the road or, you know, at different points and have one or more elk walk by to say hello.
Mhm.
And I would also just say, yeah, like Emily said, I would anticipate like a desert environment there, because a lot of the plants that have to survive there go for months and months without water, because it's a very dry area.
Mhm.
But one thing I also want to just say, for like the night times, you'll often hear howling. More often than not, it's coyotes, but very rarely will it be a wolf, because wolves kind of circulate the area. But that's something pretty cool to experience at night, to hear that howling.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love the howling of coyotes and wolves. One of my favorite sounds in the world. So we're coming to the end of this. I just want to say thank you again to the three of you. And I think we'll have one final question. So obviously we need more renewable energy to replace oil and gas in Chaco, in New Mexico, in the country, in the world. And there have been a few questions about solar installations near the park. And if people think that adding solar near the park is a good idea, or if it's problematic. Whoever wants to take this, maybe Derek, you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. I mean, renewable energy is always a great idea, especially for oil and gas state. It's always a great thing to diversify the economy. But I think as far as Chaco goes, there aren't very many transmission lines near the area. So getting some solar projects out there would be going out of the way for utility companies. There are plans, I think, in nearer communities like Hickory, Apache, to have solar projects. They're one of the nearer ones to the park. So if there is going to be solar near Chaco, would be over there, and it's not within the 10-mile buffer either. So that's just my take, is that the idea of having solar there won't be feasible for a while, because if we're trying to protect Chaco within 10 miles, there's not going to be any transmission lines there for a good while, I think. So that's my.
Emily or Paul, do you have anything to add to that? Awesome.
You know, where the big transmission lines are up west of Farmington, 35 to 40 miles northwest. So that is really an ideal spot in my mind for industrial solar. You have a mine, a couple of coal mines that are transitioning out in one case, and a lot of land that has already been pretty severely disturbed through coal mining. So putting focused industrial solar there seems like a good idea.
Absolutely. All right. If anyone has any closing remarks, speak your piece now. Awesome. Well, we did have some questions that are pretty archaeologically specific. And Paul Reed said he'd be happy to answer those. He put his email in the chat. I also just sent a link to the chat that links to the report that Paul Reed was also talking about. And then I am going to put this link in as well. We have been talking about what can we do as participants and as constituents, and this is just goes to petition that we are going to send to Secretary Deb Haaland asking for a 10-mile buffer zone of protection. So if you want to click that link, sign our petition, that would be awesome. You all clearly care about Chaco and care about ending oil drilling, or you wouldn't be here. And just showing that support and putting that on paper goes a long way for showing our representatives that people care about this issue. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone who attended. This will be, the recording of this will be sent out right after this. It's on Facebook Live. If you don't have Facebook, we will also be putting it on YouTube, but that just takes a little longer for tech to get it up. So you can just send us an email saying you want the YouTube link when it comes out. But that's all we've got for you today. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees. And here's to the best for Chaco Canyon in the future. Bye, guys.
Thanks.